When John and I first met, I thought fate had written our story long before we ever crossed paths. It was one of those college romances that everyone envied, effortless, full of laughter, and anchored by the kind of connection you read about in novels. We spent late nights studying in the library, shared secret spots on campus, and made promises under the stars that felt unbreakable. 5 years passed like a heartbeat, and when he proposed, it felt like everything in my life had been leading to that moment. I remember how he knelt in the middle of our favorite park, the ring catching the light of the setting sun. His voice shook as he asked me to be his wife, but his eyes held the certainty I had always admired. Tears streamed down my face as I said yes, and in that instant, I believed I was stepping into the beginning of my forever. Planning the wedding consumed every part of my life over the next year. I pored over every detail, carefully selecting flowers, matching the bridesmaids' dresses to the soft blush of the centerpieces, and curating the perfect playlist for the reception. John, though busy with work, always seemed happy to indulge my excitement. He would smile at me across the table during our tastings, squeeze my hand at venue visits, and assure me that the honeymoon in Greece was going to be as magical as I imagined. Friends and family often commented on how lucky I was to have someone like John. "He absolutely adores you," they'd say, and I believed it. He had always been attentive, always there. I trusted him with the ease that came from knowing someone inside out, or at least I thought I did. The morning of our wedding was nothing short of a dream. The sunlight streaming through the window cast a golden glow across the room as my bridesmaids flitted around me. Laughter filled the space as we sipped mimosas and listened to music. I remember catching glimpses of myself in the mirror, my white dress cascading around me, and feeling like I was walking straight into the life I had always wanted. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears as she fastened my veil. "You look beautiful," she whispered. My father stood by the doorway, smiling but quiet, a rare moment of emotion from a man who rarely wore his heart on his sleeve. I hugged them both tightly, feeling the weight of their pride and love. By the time the limo pulled up to the church, my heart was racing, not out of fear, but sheer anticipation. As I stepped out, I could hear the soft hum of guests arriving inside, their excitement spilling out through the open doors. Everything felt perfect. I couldn't wait to walk down that aisle and marry John. Little did I know, that day would mark the end of something, not the beginning. As I stepped into the bridal suite at the church, the soft hum of the organ echoed faintly from the main hall. My bridesmaids fluttered around me, making final adjustments to my dress and veil. Laughter filled the air, but beneath the excitement, there was a strange tightness in my chest I couldn't explain. I dismissed it as nerves. What bride didn't feel a little overwhelmed on her wedding day? Emily, my maid of honor, had been by my side since dawn. She was the kind of friend who knew how to keep me grounded, and her steady presence had been a comfort during the chaos of wedding planning. But now, as she smoothed the fabric of my dress, her eyes darted nervously, and she avoided holding my gaze for too long. "Jen," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper, "can I talk to you for a second?" I turned to her, smiling. "What's wrong? Is the cake late or something?" She hesitated. "No, it's not that. It's probably nothing, but I overheard John on the phone last night. It sounded off." My heart skipped a beat. "Off? What do you mean?" Emily bit her lip as if debating whether to say more. "It sounded personal, intimate, like he was talking to someone close." She hesitated, then added, "I just thought you should know." I stared at her, trying to process her words. John had stayed at his best man Mike's place the night before, as tradition dictated. Could he have been calling me? No, I would have remembered if he had. Maybe he was double-checking honeymoon details or talking to his mom. I forced a laugh to lighten the mood. "He's probably just nervous. You know how he gets before big events? Remember his brother's wedding?" Emily gave a half smile, but I could see the uncertainty still lingering in her eyes. I brushed it aside, convincing myself it was just pre-wedding jitters. Hers, not mine. By the time I was ready to head to the aisle, I spotted Mike pacing near the church entrance. His eyes met mine briefly, but he quickly looked away, tugging at the cuff of his sleeve. It struck me as odd. Mike was usually the life of the party, loud, confident, always cracking jokes. Today, he looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. I told myself it was nothing. People get emotional at weddings. As I stood at the entrance, waiting for the music to cue my walk down the aisle, I glanced around the room. John stood at the altar, but something about him seemed distant. His shoulders were stiff, his jaw tight. I caught the faint vibration of his phone in his pocket, and he slipped it out just long enough to glance at the screen. His eyes flicked up, meeting mine for a brief second before he shoved the phone away and forced a tight smile. My stomach twisted. It was just nerves. It had to be. The doors opened, and the music swelled, filling the space with the soft strains of the wedding march. I took my father's arm, and we began the walk down the aisle. Every eye turned toward me, but all I could see was John. I smiled, but the unease in his gaze didn't fade. I walked out of the church, the sound of my heels echoing down the long stone aisle. The weight of the silence behind me felt suffocating, but I didn't stop. I kept my eyes fixed ahead, avoiding the stares of the guests, the pity I could already feel radiating from them. The moment I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a slap. I gasped, dragging it deep into my lungs, but the tightness in my chest didn't ease. My legs wobbled, and for a brief second, I thought I might collapse right there on the church steps. I caught the edge of the stone railing and steadied myself, my veil trailed behind me, snagging slightly on the uneven steps, but I didn't care. I wanted to tear it off, to rip every piece of this dress apart. The heavy oak doors creaked behind me, and I stiffened. I didn't turn around, but I knew it was John. His footsteps were hesitant as they approached, pausing just a few feet away. I refused to give him the satisfaction of looking at him. "Jen, please." His voice was soft, desperate. I swallowed hard, my throat burning as I forced back the tears threatening to spill. "Don't," I said sharply. He took another step closer. "I never meant to hurt you. I thought—" I spun around to face him. The words erupted from me before I could stop them. "You thought what, John? That you could marry me and keep sleeping with my best friend?" He winced. "I thought I could fix it." "Fix it?" I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head. "You can't fix this. You shattered everything." The door opened again, and I saw Emily slip outside. She hesitated, standing just at the edge of the doorway, her hands gripping the sides of her dress. Our eyes met, and she quickly looked away. Of course she would follow him out here. I clenched my fists, the bouquet still dangling from one hand, petals crushed and wilted from my grip. I felt so small, standing between the two people I had trusted most, betrayed in the most unforgivable way. "I should have known," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You were always there, weren't you? At every fitting, every planning session, always ready to help." Emily opened her mouth to respond, but I held up my hand, silencing her. "I wasn't interested in excuses. You could have said something. Either of you." I glanced at John. "But you let me put on this dress, walk down that aisle, and stand in front of everyone I love. How could you?" John's eyes glistened, but no words came. For once, he had nothing to say. Good. I took a deep breath and looked past them, back toward the parking lot. The stretch of pavement ahead suddenly felt like freedom. "I don't want to hear anything else from you," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "Whatever happens between you two, I don't care anymore." John took a step forward, but I backed away, gripping the railing tighter. "Goodbye, John." I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving the two of them standing on the church steps. I don't remember much of the drive back to the hotel. The world outside the window blurred as I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, watching as the streets I thought I'd be celebrating on passed by in silence. My mother sat beside me in the back seat, her hand resting gently over mine. She hadn't said much since we left the church. I think she knew words wouldn't help. When we reached the hotel, I slipped out of the car without waiting for anyone else. My father called after me, but I just gave him a small wave and disappeared through the revolving doors. I made my way up to the suite alone, the weight of my dress dragging with each step. Once inside, I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, pressing my palms flat against the wood. The room was decorated with soft white roses and champagne flutes. A small card sat on the table by the window. "Congratulations to the new Mr. and Mrs." I stared at it until my vision blurred, then tore the card in half and let the pieces fall to the floor. Without even bothering to undo the buttons on the back of my dress, I yanked at the fabric, peeling it away until the heavy folds pooled around my feet. I stood there in silence, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was barely recognizable, mascara smudged under her eyes, her hair slipping loose from carefully styled curls. A bride with no wedding. I don't know how long I stood there before I finally collapsed onto the edge of the bed, burying my face in my hands. The tears I'd been holding back poured out all at once, deep, gut-wrenching sobs that echoed through the empty room. I thought of everything John and I had planned, the honeymoon in Greece, the new apartment we'd signed the lease for. I thought of the moments leading up to this day, the nights we'd spent dreaming of our future, and it was gone, just like that. The sound of my phone vibrating snapped me out of it. I wiped my face and glanced at the screen. John. I let it ring. A second call came through almost immediately after, and I stared at the screen until it stopped. Then came the texts, long paragraphs I didn't bother to read. I turned the phone over and let it slide to the floor. I must have fallen asleep at some point because when I woke up, the light outside had faded. The room was dim, the only sound coming from the faint hum of the city beyond the window. I sat up slowly, my body aching from the weight of exhaustion and heartbreak. For a moment, I thought about calling Emily. Why? But even the thought made me feel sick. Instead, I picked up the phone and dialed the only person I wanted to hear from. "Hey, sweetie," my father answered after one ring. His voice was soft, full of concern. "Can you come up?" I whispered. "Of course. I'm right here." A few minutes later, he knocked lightly on the door. When I opened it, he didn't say anything. He just stepped inside and wrapped me in his arms, holding me as I broke down all over again. "You did the right thing," he said softly, brushing the hair from my face. I nodded against his chest, but I wasn't sure if I believed it yet. The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, warm against my face as I sat curled up by the window. The hotel room was silent except for the faint hum of the city waking up below. I sipped the coffee my mom had left earlier, though it had long since gone cold. The bitterness didn't bother me. Somehow, it felt fitting. I stared down at the streets, watching people go about their day as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. It felt strange how quickly life could unravel. One moment, I was a bride standing at the altar, ready to vow forever. The next, I was here, alone, peeling away the layers of a relationship I thought was unbreakable. The memory of John's face when he confessed still flickered in my mind, the way his hands trembled, the way his eyes darted around like he couldn't bear to look at me directly. I had spent so many years believing he was incapable of hurting saving me. I was wrong. For a long time, I thought betrayal would feel louder, like screaming or breaking glass, but it wasn't. It was quiet, a cold, sinking realization that the person I trusted most had already slipped away, long before I knew to notice. There was a knock at the door, soft but deliberate. I didn't need to ask who it was. I opened it, and there he stood, John, shoulders slumped, hands in his pockets. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, like he hadn't slept. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I needed to see you, he said quietly. His voice was familiar, but it no longer carried the comfort it once did. I stepped aside, letting him in. He hovered near the window, staring out at the same streets I had been watching all morning. I'm sorry, Jen, he said, barely above a whisper. I know I've said it before, but I held up my hand, stopping him. Don't. John turned to face me, his eyes searching mine for something. Understanding, maybe. Forgiveness. I wasn't sure. I'll end things with Emily, he said, stepping closer. I swear, I'll fix this. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. The man who shattered me was now trying to piece me back together with promises that came too late. You can't fix this, I said softly. My voice didn't shake the way I thought it would. You didn't just hurt me, John. You broke us. His expression crumbled. For the first time, I saw something I hadn't expected. Fear. Not fear of losing me, but fear of facing the consequences of his choices. I loved you, I continued, my throat tightening. I would have given you everything, but you chose her. Over and over again. John stepped forward, reaching for my hand, but I pulled away. I deserve better than this, I said, each word feeling heavier than the last. I deserve better than you. For a moment, he just stood there, shoulders sagging as if the weight of his betrayal had finally caught up to him. He nodded once, then walked to the door. When it closed behind him, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The room felt quieter, emptier, but not in a bad way. There was no dramatic sense of relief, no sudden rush of freedom, just quiet. And in that quiet, I found a small flicker of peace. In the days that followed, I focused on healing. I spent more time with my parents, let my friends pull me out of the house for coffee dates and walks by the ocean. Slowly, the weight of that day began to fade, like shadows dissolving at sunrise. I heard from mutual friends that John and Emily moved in together. Strangely, the news didn't sting the way I thought it might. Whatever they had wasn't mine to carry anymore. One afternoon, I stood by the pier, letting the salty breeze tangle through my hair. The waves crashed below, steady and endless. I realized then that I wasn't broken. I was rebuilding. The life I thought I wanted with John was gone, but I was still here. And somehow, that was enough. If you liked our story, make sure to subscribe to our channel, and you can also share your stories with us for our viewers. Thanks for watching.